Welcome to the Receptive Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Nina Elise. Hi, and thank you so much for joining me in today's episode. I have got a treat for you. I will be going more in depth into the Gene Keys Venus sequence and my journey with it. And this is actually something that I wasn't really familiar with about a year or so ago. I have had my journey with human design over the past 3 to 4 years, and Gene Keys has been a little bit a part of that. It is very closely related to human design. So Gene Keys is based on the 64 Gene Keys, which are in alignment with the I Ching and astrology, and they're in alignment with the 64 gates of human design, if you're familiar with that. But Gene Keys is a little bit different. So it's more of like, I would say, the yin to human design's yang. So it's like this soft place to land for you to explore these 64 different Gene Keys. And they're basically like these transmissions that are hidden within your DNA. And based on your exact birth time and date and location, you get your own Gene Keys journey or your own chart. And it's very unique to each person. And the whole premise of exploring your Gene Keys is to look at the different frequencies that lie within your DNA, where these like keys or codes are embedded within you. And these frequencies operate in like a couple of different ways. So for each Gene Key that you have, there's a shadow frequency, there's a gift, and the city of it. And when you begin to explore your unique chart, you can go down a couple of different routes. So Gene Keys has an activation sequence that kind of goes through, and I think it's 4 different Gene Keys within your chart that help you understand like your purpose in this lifetime. And it's based on your sun and your earth signs in astrology and human design. And the next course or like sequence that you can go through is the Venus sequence. And this sequence is, I think it's like 6 or 7 Gene Keys. And it's basically like this inner journey that you go on that cracks your heart wide open and helps you see like some very deep unconscious patterns that you carry within your DNA. And these Gene Keys within your sequence are what contain the liberation to opening up your heart and living just a more open, loving life. It's basically like a journey into love, and it's an awakening that happens when you go through this, because it's like these transmissions that you read, and it's almost like it ignites something within your DNA or awakens something in your DNA for you to explore. So you're basically going into like wound patterns and how they were imprinted during your childhood. And then Gene Keys is kind of like this soft place to land where it is there for you as you begin to awaken to these unconscious or repressed wounds or like core patterns within us, and then provides a safe space for us to release and forgive ourselves and have more acceptance and to love ourselves. And so as you go through the Venus sequence, you're basically going through the series of Gene Keys that eventually lead to the final sphere. And that is your core wound, which is like your greatest gift or service to the whole. So you go through this journey, and it kind of, each sphere unlocks something new and different that you get to explore from like different stages of your life in your past that go all the way to the time back to your birth. So it's impactful in the sense that this specific sequence, the Venus sequence, is about love. And so it's very much so for people who are looking to heal their relationships with other people and within themselves, and to just open their hearts. And this is not something that you step into lightly, because it can be very jarring for people if they're not ready and they don't have the support around them to go into these aspects of themselves, because you are going to be uncovering aspects of yourself, the shadow aspects of yourself that can be very uncomfortable and difficult to look at. So basically, when I started the Venus sequence, it was like, okay, like my entire life was basically crumbling under like all around me. And I was like realizing that I was the problem. It was all me. And so I wanted to not repeat this. And so when I looked at the Venus sequence. I didn't really understand what it was. And I did all this research and I still didn't understand what it was, but something inside of me was like, this is the next step that you need to go into. And so basically I was going through this like spiritual awakening, and all of my shadows were coming up for me to look at. And I was living at my dad's house. I wasn't working, and I was just like in this complete hole of my life, and like had let go of like the biggest relationship of my life. I had gone through deep betrayal in my relationships and just was in a very hurt, dark place. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to just go head on into this, because if I don't look at my stuff now, this is going to continue on in my life and in my future relationships. And that was just not acceptable to me. And so when I entered the Venus sequence, I was like, okay, I'm going to keep my heart open and I'm going to look at everything and see, what have I been doing wrong? Where have I not been taking ownership of things? And when you go through this sequence, you're basically realizing, like, you go through this process of realizing that it's all just you. And I'm laughing because it's like, it is such a journey to go through this and to look at parts of yourself and say, well, what if that other person is not to blame? What if I was projecting this onto this person because I have this deep wound of insecurity or fear of betrayal, and this is why I have behaved the way that I have? And then you learn how to take responsibility for all of your actions and your behaviors. And as you go through this sequence, you learn how to radically take responsibility for every single relationship in your life and every single reaction to every relationship in your life. So when I say, like, this is not something to be taken lightly, like, it is no joke, because you are going into the depths of the hardest parts of yourself that are scary to look at. And so when I signed up for this course, you can do, it's a self-paced course. You can go at it at your own pace and your own time. And during that time period when I signed up to do it, there was actually a 6-month ongoing like community course where they had stuff almost every single week. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people that were signed up for this. And you could go and like, you go through the different sequences and the spheres, and then you talk about it with other people. And it can be helpful in processing. It can be helpful in like sharing and seeing someone else who has similarities in their gene key sequence and how it might be relatable to you and something you could learn from them. I personally didn't really join too much in that, because after I had started the sequence, it became a very intimate experience for me that I didn't feel the need to share with other people. And just intuitively that felt right for me. But I know that it's very helpful to have that support. I will say that I had support of my family and my friends at the time as I was going through all of this, and then also working with my therapist almost every single week. So, you know, as I was going through and uncovering like these really difficult parts of myself to look at, it was very much like, okay, I can lean on somebody and go talk to my therapist about this and say, like, what does this mean? What does this look like? And, you know, how can I take responsibility for this? And then over the course of, I think it took me like 2 to 4 months to go through the Venus sequence, because I wasn't working. I was journaling and going through all of this like for hours and hours and hours every day. Like, when I say hours, I'm not kidding at all, because I would get up and I would journal, and I would, you know, sit in contemplation with the potentialities of like the shadows and the gift and the city. And I would just reflect back on like my biggest relationships and say, why is this triggering to me? Why did this happen? Why did I attract this person in my life? Why am I attracting these relationships in my life? And you start to explore different aspects within your Venus sequence that give you like this map that you can go and look at and explore. And so it is a very like intimate personal experience, and yet it is helpful to have support, because it will bring up emotions and it will bring up potential blame or shame or like, you know, all these different aspects that we may not be equipped to handle. And so when I say it's helpful to have support when you go through this, it's helpful to have someone to talk through things if you don't have that like, I don't want to say emotional maturity. I personally did not at the time to handle all of this, but it was something that I like grew into as I learned how to take responsibility and learned how to manage and process my emotions as they were coming up, and learned how to stop pointing my fingers and placing blame on other people. But it is helpful to have someone there to give you that support if you need that emotional support, because there are going to be difficult days. There are going to be days where something comes up and you're like, wow, I cannot look at this right now. I cannot deal with this. I cannot take responsibility for this. And sometimes you just need a little bit of help when you are going through this sequence. And so if any of this does not make sense to you, because there's nothing like definite that I'm giving you, I'm going to give you an example. So for example, the first sphere that you go through in the Venus sequence is your purpose. And this is like what you're here to bring to your relationships, the purpose of your relationships. And my specific sphere is gene key 64. And this is my unconscious earth in my human design chart. And basically the shadow aspect is confusion, and the gift is imagination, and the city is illumination. And so basically in the Venus course that I went through online, it gives you a series of prompts and audios for you to listen to that tell you like, okay, this is the shadow aspect. And to go a little bit deeper, there's lines that go with it as well. And you get to explore all of that. And the course gives you journal prompts that say, okay, like, how do you see this reflected in your current life? What relationships are you experiencing the shadow aspect of this in your life? And so you just sit with it. And so I would sit with, the shadow or the gift or the city for hours and hours over the course of a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And I would journal and say like, okay, this is where I'm seeing this. And it forces you to be incredibly radically honest about your behaviors and what you're bringing to relationships. And you begin to quickly realize that it really is just all you. And that's a very difficult pill to swallow. And so when you go through this course, it requires so much grace and compassion and forgiveness for yourself. It's like you really learn how to hold space for yourself as you're going through this, because you're digging up some pretty challenging and difficult things to look at within yourself. So with this specific gene key, it was like I could see where I was basically living in my head in a state of confusion, and I wasn't allowing myself to be in the frequency of the gift of this gene key. So when I was sitting in the frequency of the gift of the city, it's imagination, and there was more freedom and there was less confusion and trying to figure things out and just allowing things to happen in their own timing. And I could see that is like what I brought to relationships. Like when I was in my highest frequency at the city state, I was like this bright, shining light in relationships and around other people. But when I was in my head and I was trying to make sense of things and I was judging things and I didn't know how to get out of my head, I was in this lower state that really negatively affected my relationships, where I would project onto other people, but then other people were just reflecting all of that back to me, but I was constantly blaming them. And so that's just an example of, one of the gene keys. And from the purpose sphere, you go up to the attraction sphere, which basically goes more in depth about like the types of people you attract and why you attract them. And then you go up to your intelligence quotient, which is like your mental body. This is basically like what is imprinted upon you from age 15 to 21. And then from there, you go over to your emotional quotient, your astral body. And this is something that's developed around age 8 to 14, like your emotions and how you handle them. And then from there, you go up into your spiritual quotient, and this is related to your physical body. And this is something that is developed through ages 0 through 7 that you're taking in from your environment and the people around you. And then from there, you eventually make your way up to the core wound. And this is like basically from the time that you're in your mother's womb, from gestation to 9 months. And this is like where your greatest shadow is and where, your biggest gift to the whole, to the collective lies. So there's like this progression of you going back in time and revisiting a lot of things from your past and saying, where did I, first start to behave like this? What was my environment like? Who was I around? Why did I develop these belief systems? Why did I, learn how to manage my emotions this way? Where did I learn how to intellectually think the way that I do? And so it's incredibly eye-opening to take a look at everything that, is basically embedded in you that you're just not aware of. And so when I talk about gene keys as being a transmission, it really is when you start reading and getting into your gene keys, you are literally unlocking these codes or these transmissions that have been lying dormant in your body that you have not been consciously aware of, and it begins to awaken something within you so that you can move from those lower shadow frequencies all the way up to the city. And you can access these states at any time. It's not like, oh, I'm operating the shadow and then, I hit the next level and I'm going to be in the gift all the time. It's like you're going to be oscillating between these frequencies. And it's just this lifelong journey of becoming aware of these different aspects of yourself and why you're operating the way that you are. And so I wanted to share all of this with you because it was such a journey. So this was about a year ago when I first started the Venus sequence, and it can take people anywhere from 2 months to the rest of their life to go through this sequence. There is this self-paced course. It's something you go at in your own time. For me personally, I went through it in 2 to 4 months on my own because I had the time and the space to process all of that. And even a year later, I've actually gone back and revisited the Venus sequence and have been able to go deeper and explore and see things that I did not see before about myself. Again, very humbling, but it becomes more and more rewarding because you are able to develop that emotional ability to be able to handle what is coming up for you. And you learn how to be soft and gentle and compassionate with yourself. And I feel like that is something that is really cultivated, that you learn over time as you go through the Venus sequence, because it's kind of the only way to manage and deal with what is coming up, because you cannot be hard on yourself when you are having these realizations about yourself. It's like you basically do a lot of inner child work and a lot of reparenting when you go through the Venus sequence. And so it can be very profound in that aspect. It can be very healing in that aspect. And again, the reason why I did it was because I had reached such a low in my life where my relationships were just crumbling around me, and I had realized I had been hurting so many people around me, and I felt like I had been attracting people that were hurting me, and it was just I just wanted to completely purify myself, and the only way that I felt like I could do that was if I went inward. And I went deep. And the Venus sequence has the potential to really take you there if you are open and you are willing and you have that space, or maybe that's just your soul path. But I think it was one of those things where I was just the common denominator in my life was me. And, it wasn't like this overnight, oh, haha, I'm enlightened and I'm now in all the gift and the city frequencies. It was over the course of the past year, it was as I was going through the different spheres in the sequence, I was still repeating old patterns. And I think that was the hardest part for me, because it was I was becoming aware of these aspects of myself, and then I was still repeating them and still hurting people. But it was part of the process, because I had to see myself in action to really be whoa, okay, this is not something I'm going to continue with. And David Hawkins has this way of describing kind of the self-awareness aspect of really letting go of things, and I really like it, so I'm going to share it with you. But basically, he says, as you become aware of something within yourself, you don't need to do anything. You just need to observe and be aware of it without judgment. And he takes the analogy of eating cookies. So the way he describes it is, say you become aware that you're eating 50 cookies a day. And you become aware of it and you're oh, this is actually not healthy for me. Well, normally people's reaction is oh, I'm going to completely cut out all cookies in my life and I'm never going to touch them again. Well, obviously that doesn't work for most people, because now you are removing something from your life that you had this addiction to, or this obviously there's something within you in a deep place that is emotionally attached to eating those cookies, or there's a core issue that is causing you to reach for those cookies. And it's very rare that someone can just completely cut something out cold turkey. Even if they do, then that problem is still going to persist within them, and it's just going to show up in a different way in their lives. And so with the self-awareness aspect of it, is the way David Hawkins explains the easiest way to do it. Isn't necessarily the fastest way, is to become aware of you eating cookies. So maybe the second day you're okay, I'm noticing that I'm eating cookies, but you're still allowing yourself to eat cookies. But maybe you only eat 49 the next day. And then the next day, you eat your cookies and you're like, I'm aware that I eat a lot of cookies. But then you eat 53. Again, no judgment. You're just like, okay, I'm eating cookies, but maybe this isn't the best thing for me. And then the fourth day, maybe you only eat 30. And then the day after that, maybe you go back to eating 60. And then the day after that, it goes back down to like 40. And so you begin to just observe yourself playing out these behaviors without judgment and just allowing it to eventually phase out until there's one day where you're only down to eating one cookie and then no cookies. So that's how I feel like it's very similar to the Venus sequence and the way that you can uncover and you can slowly phase out old aspects of yourself in a way that there's no pressure, there's no judgment, there's no forcing. It's just this natural progression and unfolding and releasing and letting go of like these old aspects of yourself. So kind of going back to where I said I was repeating these old things, like I was really hard on myself because I was like, oh my gosh, I know better than this. But it was like the more that I became aware of these things, I became able to hold space for myself and have compassion. And this is where in that time period, I learned how to really radically forgive myself and let myself know that I am still loved, even though I'm still, quote unquote, messing up and still repeating these behaviors, and I might still be hurting people, but this is just like the natural progression of doing things. And as I was going through all of this, it was like I learned how to get really, really quiet, and I learned how to come back to myself when I was really struggling with something and hold space for myself and have deep forgiveness for myself. And then over time, these behaviors just slowly began to phase out. And so it did take some time. I mean, it's been, about a year since I've been doing this, but I'm just sharing this because I know it can be a difficult path when you become aware of something and then you kind of beat yourself up for going back to the old. Well, it's actually a really natural progression. And when we remove the judgment from it and we still allow ourselves to have that old stuff show up in our lives, we're able to give ourselves grace and compassion so that it's actually a natural progression of ease to let go of and release that old stuff. And so that's what I really love about the Venus sequence is that there's so much grace and compassion with it. And as you're going through it, it's just gently opening your heart. And I've heard Richard Rudd, who is the person who channeled the Gene Keys, I've heard him talk about awakening as a series of softenings. And that was something that I have been experiencing on such a profound level going through the Venus sequence. It's like it is a series of softenings, of awakening and going and softening and your heart opening up even more and more and more each time. And so that is, what I really gained from going through the Venus sequence. I learned how to stop pointing my finger and placing blame on other people whenever there was something that was triggered within me. I learned how to come back to myself when I personally was triggered. And where I'm at right now, like I'm obviously not perfect, like no one's perfect. I'm at a point, a year later where if something is triggering to me, I don't reach for my phone and complain and like dump my drama onto other people. I sit with it. I sit in contemplation with it. And sometimes I'll be with it for weeks until there's like, okay, like I can release this. Because when you get a trigger, it's forcing you to look at other wounds that you were not necessarily aware of. And, if I'm really struggling after, a couple of days or something, I'll call my mentor or I will work with my therapist and have a session with her and do some EFT tapping around it and kind of explore like what is it that's coming up for me and to go a little bit deeper to help me gain like a deeper awareness or understanding of why something is triggering for me. So there are different ways that you can definitely approach it. But I would say that my relationships have improved, not every single relationship, because this is obviously a process and different people will trigger different things within you. And I've learned to really trust the unfoldment of working on different relationships and working on different things and trust that I am always being led to the correct people that are going to show and reflect back to me what I need to see within myself in each moment. And so I definitely went through this period of feeling very alone. I will say that because you realize like when it really is all just you and everyone is just a mirror to you, it's like, oh, like how is there really anyone else that exists? And I know that sounds kind of funny, but like it really is. It's like you are the one that is attaching meaning to each relationship. And it can be very difficult because when you enter into karmic contracts with people, they're there to teach you different things and we can get lost in that. But when we can step back from that and we realize it's just you against you, and it's you having to work out something internally within yourself and hold space and have love and compassion for yourself, then that's when you can release that karmic attachment to that relationship, and that person will phase out of your life, or that relationship will just continue to evolve and in a different way. And so it can feel very lonely at first, because you're coming back to yourself. You're learning how to do everything and process everything on your own, because you are the one that is creating meaning to these relationships and everything in your life. And it's actually a really beautiful thing when you go through this process, but it's definitely not easy because you are really challenging a lot of belief systems. You are having to take responsibility for basically everything in your life and the way that you react and things. And it's not your fault, because these are things that we've been conditioned at a very young age in our society, and we just don't have the awareness to see that within ourselves until we are ready. And, we all go at our own pace. And so, like I said, going through the Venus sequence has taught me like this radical acceptance, and has given me the practice to cultivate deep grace and compassion and forgiveness, not just for myself, but for other people. Because the more that I'm able to give this to myself, the more that I can give that to other people. So I think that's all that I have to share about the Venus sequence for right now. I hope that this was understandable, or you were able to understand this in a way that is applicable to your life. Gene keys, they have different activations and sequences after the Venus sequence. They have the Pearl sequence, which goes into your vocation and how you make money and your career and things like that. And so it's recommended you start with the activation sequence. I did not personally do that. I started with the Venus sequence because it was very relevant to where I was at in my life and what I needed in that moment. And I'm now actually going back to the activation sequence, which is actually shorter and probably the best thing to start with. But if you have any interest in going a little bit deeper into Gene Keys, you can go to their website at genekeys.com, and you can explore the different courses that they have. And I'm also happy to answer any other questions or go a little bit deeper into this. I do have some YouTube videos around Gene Keys and the Venus sequence and my experience with that. And I'm happy to explain a little bit more if anyone has questions about this. But again, it was incredibly profound for me to go through the Venus sequence and to dive deeper into my Gene Keys. And it will bring you closer to yourself. It will improve your relationships, most likely. Richard Rudd does talk about how when you enter the Venus sequence, do not break up with your partner unless obviously it's like an abusive partnership, but because you personally transform in it. And as you transform, the person that you're in partnership with normally transforms with you. In some cases, they will not transform with you and that relationship will just break off. But that is one thing that I wanted to add, because honestly, this is something that I wish I had done a couple of years prior, and maybe that would have been helpful, and maybe it would have been helpful in the relationship at the time, and maybe my life would have gone down a different trajectory. But, I do trust in the divine perfection and timing of life, and the Venus sequence will always enter your life, or Gene Keys or human design or whatever tool or modality that you need the most to go deeper will always show up in the perfect timing to show you what you need to see. So I hope that this episode was helpful to you, and that you were able to learn something a little bit different or a little bit new. Just, again, another tool that is available to explore your inner world and go deeper and get to know yourself more. And if you want to call it like healing, this is just another tool or modality that you can use on this type of journey. So if you had some sort of insight or something clicked for you, or you enjoyed something about this episode, please share with your friends and family, post on social media, leave a review if you haven't already. It means the world to me when, you guys have your support for me, and this also helps my podcast reach more people. So again, thanks so much, you guys. I love you. I'm so grateful for you, and thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next episode. All right, bye.